Right, hello everybody. Thank you for coming back. As you know, we're on the ABC series at the moment, and we've done A, B, and C and D, and today we are on E. So for the letter E, the word that we're going to talk about is the word ego, E-G-O, ego. So, of course, there are many modern definitions of the word ego. A lot of them are tied up with psychoanalysis definitions. But the ultimate, most basic, most true, most accepted one, according to sort of the spiritual viewpoint, would be that ego is our sense of I, the sense of I-ness. A kind of identity of I. And obviously we all have ego. I mean, you could not have an identity as a separate entity, I, without having ego. Unfortunately, although ego itself is not inherently an arrogant or prideful thing, it can become that way, and I'll explain how. I need to elaborate better on that. The thing is, the Bhagavad Gita distinguishes between real ego, like absolute ego that doesn't change with time, place, and circumstance, which is the real I, or the real you, the eternal, never changing identity, which is the soul, which never changes and is immortal and eternal. Therefore, it's an absolute identity in that it cannot change according to time, place, and circumstance. And if that soul was to go through many, many, many different bodies, which the Bhagavad Gita explains, then something is changing, but something is staying the same. And the thing that's changing is the bodily identity. But the soul, the actual ego, doesn't change. So the relative ego, the one that changes with time, place, and circumstance, is called false ego. That's where we connect or focus our sense of I on the body. And I mean, obviously that will be changing with time. You can't take that with you. So we have to ask ourselves, what identity of I-ness do I take with me when leaving this body? Every single identifier that we hang on to our whole lives and build upon as well would have to be left behind, because they're not spiritual in nature, so they can't go on with you. So that would mean your sense of I-ness being, I am a male or female, I am black, I am white, I am Chinese, I am Caucasian, I'm an Italian, I'm an Argentinian, I'm tall, I'm short, I'm skinny, I'm chubby. Your name, your job, all these things, they're temporary designations, which we've spoken about in a previous talk. They're temporary designations that cannot go with us. Therefore, they cannot be the real I. They cannot be the real ego, which is the soul, which does go on with you, which is you. So these temporary manifestations of the I, these materialistic manifestations of the I, which cannot go on with us, they are called false ego. And the two of them are clearly spoken about in the Bhagavad Gita. There's a lot of discussion and talk about the false ego and how it causes so much strife for us. If you just think about this, if you meet a person and you say to them, "Who are you?" then what are they going to say back to you? They are going to say their name. "Oh, I'm Peter. Oh, I'm Bob." Let's say we strip that answer away and say, you're not allowed that answer. Give me another answer. Then they might say, oh, well, I'm a man. Well, but let's say we take that away and say, that's not a permanent thing. You can't say I'm a man. That's not you don't take manness, the manly body with you. So you're not allowed that answer. Then they'll say, oh, well, I'm a builder. Well, you won't be a builder once you've left this body. So you can't use that either. Every time they try to say, who am I? They will give you a temporary material answer because they're operating as false ego. Eventually, if you strip everything away from them, every answer they give, every materialistic, non-permanent answer away from them, eventually they might, as a last resort, come to the soul. They might say, oh, I'm a soul. I'm a spirit soul. I'm a permanent, enduring, immortal soul. And then finally you've got to the ego. All the rest was false ego. And you can see, just imagine, just try it even. Just imagine speaking to people out there in the street. Who are you? You know they're going to give you all those material identifiers, those temporary material identifiers is what's going to come to mind. That's because we associate ourselves with our material body. We mistakenly think that the I is the body. And even if we verbalize with our mouths, oh no, I'm not this body. I mean, I do this all the time. No, I know I'm not this body. I know I'm not this body. And yet, still, when you introduce yourself to someone, you'll say, I am a teacher. I'm a builder. They say, what do you do? You know. So still, we are very, very, very tied up with the false ego, and it's a problem. It's a big problem for spiritual development. And the Bhagavad Gita is trying to explain to us how to get out of the false ego back to the real ego. So when I say that we have a tendency towards pridefulness and arrogance, arrogance is one of the definitions of ego. Technically, they should have identified that as false ego, but these are secular definitions. The ego that tends towards arrogance and pridefulness is the false ego. The false ego, like, oh, I'm a big Hollywood movie star. I make zillions every month. Look how I've made it. That arrogance and pridefulness is because he associates himself as being that body, that bodily success. So he's forgotten his real ego. So yeah, we are very tied up in this false ego, and it has a tendency towards arrogance, towards thinking that everything that we've done was done by this body, and I run the show, and we forget about the spirit soul. So here are some Bhagavad Gita, just a few Bhagavad Gita quotes on this idea. Chapter 2, text 71. This is a partial quote because it's a bit long, so I'll leave out a little bit in the middle. A person devoid of false ego, he alone can attain real peace. So devoid of false ego, not having false ego. What does that mean? It means they do not associate themselves, the I, as that body, nor its temporary designations. Chapter 3, text 27. The spirit soul, bewildered by the influence of false ego, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by the three modes of material nature. Now, we haven't done the three modes of material nature, so I could just simplify this to say that what the message is here is that the spirit soul, which is the real I, the real true ego, I, spirit soul, is bewildered and confused and forgetful and distracted by material things, including their own material body. And it says here, thinks himself the doer of activities. That's what I said about the Hollywood thing. Thinks himself, I, this body, have succeeded here in Hollywood because I'm so beautiful. Everybody wants my autograph. I'm just so beautiful. Just look at these muscles that I've developed. And so that is definitely associating with the false ego in an arrogant way, thinking, I have done this. So the spirit soul, the real ego, is bewildered by the influence of false ego. False ego is overpowering real ego. And then Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, text 43, we get here an analysis of which parts or facets are higher than others. The general idea is that the higher the, I don't know what the word would be there, the higher the feature, then that should be controlling the features below it, not the other way around, although we tend to have it backwards. So it says here, the senses are higher than the body, the mind higher than the senses. That means your mind should control your senses, but we know very well our senses control our minds. We sense gratification. Oh, I see a nice cake in that cafe. That's me. I see a nice cake in that cafe. Oh, I've got to go in there. So now your mind's telling you you've got to go in there. And that's because the senses were the boss. I could just taste that nice sugary icing. And so the senses were the boss. And then your mind just played ball with it and said, yes, let's go in there. And so the mind is higher than the senses. Above the mind is the intellect. So that would mean that the senses would start, drooling for the icing on the cake. And the intellect should control the mind, which should control the senses. So your mind might go, yeah, I want to go in there and get that cake. And then your intellect should step in and go, no, I know we want to go in there and eat that cake, but my intellect tells me blah, blah, blah. So the intellect should be above the mind. And above the intellect is the Atman. Now, that's the soul. Thus, knowing that which is supreme, let the Atman rule the ego. So the soul must be the ruler of all ego, because true ego is the soul. That should be the way things are run, not the false ego, our bodily conception of our achievements and our identity. Now, if we think about the Bible in terms of ego and false ego, the Bible doesn't mention ego by name, definitely doesn't mention ego, nor does it mention false ego. But nevertheless, it's asking us, without using the words ego and false ego, it's asking us to switch our locus of focus, to switch it from false ego, which we know becomes prideful. False ego, oh, I am the doer, I in this body am in control, and I've done all these things, and look what I've achieved, and I'm a great actor, or I'm a famous architect, or I'm an esteemed painter. These temporary false ego designations are not welcome in the Bible either, because we know that that false ego is very prone to arrogance and not at all prone to be humble. And yet the Bible entreats us to move away from the arrogant side and go to the humble side. Because we need to be humble, because we are only just a teensy weensy, absolutely minuscule spark of soul from the Lord, who is the giant, eternal, everlasting furnace, and we are just a tiny little spark. And if the Lord is all the oceans of all the planets one could imagine, in all the universes one could imagine, put all the oceans together, we would be one little droplet of water. So, of course, if we understand our true identity, we would be more humble. So the Bible also pushes us down that route, which is essentially asking us to leave false ego behind. So in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18, it says, "Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall." Don't be prideful, don't be haughty. It's not leading us a good way. If we go down the route of false ego, which is a materialistic route, then we cannot be going down the spiritual route at the same time. So then our spiritual pathway is becoming neglected and overgrown with weeds. How are we ever going to find it again if it's so overgrown? Micah chapter 6, verse 8. "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?" Walk humbly with your God. Be humble. There are so many areas of the Bible that asks us not to be prideful and rather to be humble. James chapter 4, verse 10. "Humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you." So yeah, even though the Bible doesn't use the words ego or false ego, it definitely is entreating and guiding us to move away from the false ego concept of life and towards the true ego. I am a soul, I am eternal, and I must be humble. The body is not me, nor are the achievements of the body mine. So both are guiding us the same way. So to end off, we must strive. It seems mightily impossible at times, but we must strive to find our true, real, absolute, eternal, immortal ego of identity. I as a spirit soul, not the false ego. I as this person, this achievement, this job, this role. Good, so thank you for coming and listening. So A, B, C, D, E, F. So the next chat will be the letter F. Thank you. Stay well. Merry Christmas and Hare Krishna.